Let's start with President Trump and how last year you said that, honestly, he would move away from many of the extreme positions of his campaigning, and also, his policies would result in 3% growth. You feel like you've got those pretty correct?
Yeah, I do.
And then when it comes to
he didn't tear up all the agreements he said he was going to tear up, and we did grow at 3%.
Do we hold at 3%? We're waiting for the Atlanta GDP now Fed forecast to come in today, and it looks like it won't be anywhere close to 3%. When do you see a sustained level of 3% growth, Byron?
I do. We had 3% growth in the third quarter, which was besieged by two hurricanes. I think the underlying strength of the U.S. economy is very real.
This is before we even get anything like an infrastructure plan or before
the tax cuts kick in.
Mm-hmm. So at what point do we see something a lot greater than that then, if, as you say, tax cuts and deregulation are going to really press GDP growth higher?
It's going to be hard for us to grow much more. I think we'll head toward 4, but I don't think we'll get there.
When?
Well, this year.
OK, not at all. But you do see 4 Federal Reserve rate hikes all the same.
Oh, yeah, I do see the Fed hiking rates, but I think the natural momentum of the economy is such that the economy will plow through it. I think we'll grow,
Byron,
better than 3% pretty much all the quarters of 2018.
And Byron, you say that's good for the dollar, yes?
I do. I believe the dollar, which has been in the doldrums for a couple of years now, is going to do better.
Yeah, and you did make a call last year that maybe the euro would slip below parity. It was close, wasn't it? I think the low for the year was just above parity early last year. I mean, you were near on that one. Your call on the yen, maybe not so prescient. What sort of levels dollar yen then this year?
Well, I think, right now the yen is 113. I think it can get to 120.
OK. What about China? What's the big talk on China? You basically say that China finally deciding a nuclear capability in the hands of North Korea could lead to actions. What sort of actions?
Well, China holds the cards. If China were to stop shipping oil and food to North Korea, I think, would reduce its nuclear weapons threat. China provides 90% of the food and fuel to North Korea, so they hold the cards. And if they took that action, which so far they're showing no signs of doing, but if they took that action, I think that would neutralize North Korea.
So that's possibly one of the more outsider predictions that you're making for 2018?
No, but nobody's challenging that one as not being a surprise. That would be a surprise.
To be clear, when you talk about these surprises, you say that you attribute a more than 50% chance
right.
where
In
the market...
other words, I'm signed on to them. I believe they have a greater than 50% probability. You probably would give them no better than 1 out of 3.
Or let's say the market, for example, would give them that. Talk to us about the price of oil, because last year you said that the price would remain below 60, and honestly, for the bulk of the year, it really did.
Right.
This year, you're looking for oil to go to $80 a barrel.
Right. I think there'll be reduced production from hydraulic fracking from Nigeria, Venezuela, and other countries. So I think the demand, which is rising because worldwide growth is increasing, will drive the price to $80.
Even with shale producers?
Even with shale producers.
Byron, what about what's going on in Iran? Obviously, events have come to the fore in recent days, given the protests. Some are beginning to speculate whether Trump will walk away from this nuclear deal. You, among your probabilities, you don't think that's actually going to happen?
No, our allies, there are 6 parties, including 5 others, in addition to ourselves, that are a party to that agreement, and they want to keep it going, even though at the end of 10 years it expires. But my belief is that what we're going to see is that Trump will not move away from it. He'll stay on board. He may not sign all the inspection agreements, but he won't withdraw from the agreement as a whole.
Another interesting call, Byron, especially on the day that the UK Trade Minister Liam Fox talked about the possibility of Britain joining the TPP. You cite maybe Trump's regret of pulling out of the TPP, and he could pursue bilateral deals.
Right. I think Trump, look, China is becoming the country of influence in Asia, and Trump doesn't like to see that. He likes to see the U.S. being the center of influence throughout the world. So my feeling is he'll have second thoughts, but I don't think much will come of it. I think the big call in the UK is that Jeremy Corbyn will become the next Prime Minister.
And Byron, hold that thought. We're going to talk about Jeremy Corbyn in the next section, so hold your thoughts on that, Vonnie.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're going to get to Europe and a lot of your predictions there. But before we finish with the US, you do see a 10% correction for the S&P 500, but that it will finish the year much higher.
Right. Everybody's talking about a 10% correction. They talked about it throughout 2017. I think we'll finally have it, but I think it'll be a correction, not the beginning of a bear market.
So, Byron, of your 10 surprises, you also talk about populism and how obviously it gave birth perhaps to a movement in the US, but also in Europe. Has it run its course with Angela Merkel gaining another term, or do you see more to go with the populist movements?
Well, I thought Merkel would have a tough time of it, and she did. I thought she'd actually lose, but she did. But she is having trouble forming a coalition. I think the big 2018 surprise that I have involving Europe is that Jeremy Corbyn becomes the next Prime Minister. That would be a surprise. I don't think people have really factored that in. But Britain is slowing down. I mean, Britain was growing at 2% before the September 23rd Brexit vote. It's growing at 1% now. I think the UK is hurting. We can hear confirmation from your counterpart overseas on that. But I think the people are unhappy and they want change, and Jeremy Corbyn represents change, just as Donald Trump did.
Byron, we've got a piece on the Bloomberg today about outlook for Brexit in 2018, and we talk about various scenarios, and interestingly among them is an election this year which leads to which leads to Jeremy Corbyn becoming Prime Minister, which is among your surprises of the year. And the view is if he becomes Prime Minister, the Labour Party will then try and get close to Europe. What's your assumption if we have a Corbyn-led government? Do we get closer to Europe, or do we move further away from Europe?
Well, let me throw a question back at you. Mm-hmm. If the Brexit election were held today, how do you think the UK would vote? Do you think they would vote to leave or remain?
Well, I mean, you read surveys and it's touch and go. Sometimes it's 52 would vote remain, sometimes 48 would vote remain. So it's pretty much in line with what the actual result was in June 2016. I don't think it's clear cut.
Well, that's why it's a surprise. It would be a surprise for Corbyn to win, and I think Britain would try to move closer to Europe as a result.
Either way, Byron, what do you see happening with the British economy, GDP-wise?
Well, right now, if Brexit remains in place, I think the British economy will be the slowest economy among the major countries in Europe.
And speaking of it, sterling, you have a very strong call for the euro and for the US dollar. Where do you see sterling going next year?
Well, I think the dollar is going to be strong next year. So, I could see sterling going down. I could see it going back into the 120s.
And among your call on Merkel and populism last year, Byron, I mean, essentially, I'm just looking at your call in front of me. You say the electorate questions the usefulness of the EU, and by the end of the year, plans are actively discussed to close it down, abandon the euro, and turn to their national currencies. Do you sense with the election of Emmanuel Macron, and let's say Merkel manages to cobble together a coalition, do you think the opposite might happen? Are we going to see further integration of the European Union at the behest of France's new president?
Look, one of the things that Brexit did was it brought the continental Europe closer together. I was dead wrong on that. I think the European Union is stronger and more solidified today than it has been almost at any time in its history. So I think Europe is growing at 2%. It's got some natural momentum now, and therefore I think the idea of it breaking apart was wrong.
Before we get to some also-rans, I do want to mention that one of your surprises is that the Republicans lose control of both the Senate and the House of Representatives. Do you really think that there's more than a 50% chance of that happening?
I'm signed on to it, Vonnie. I mean, look, thinking the Democrats could take control of the House, that's not a surprise. But thinking that the Democrats could take control of the Senate when there are 34 seats at stake, 26 of them are Democratic seats, 8 are Republican. Thinking that the Democrats can get control of the Senate, that would be a surprise. Yeah. But it's based on a referendum on Trump. And you could argue, and one of the things that I played around with when I was developing the surprises is the American people feel that Trump has been good for the economy. They got a tax cut, the economy's growing at 3%. What's to complain about? But I still think the Democrats have a good chance of taking not only the House, but also the Senate.
We have to mention some also-rans. These are ones that don't make it into the top 10, but that are very well worth talking about, including Bitcoin. You say the risks are so great that regulatory authorities actually restrict trading in the cryptocurrency.
Yeah, that may not happen only because there's so many other currencies, and you're beginning to see people focusing on the other cryptocurrencies, not just Bitcoin. But I'm not signed on to it. I haven't traded in it, and I don't recommend buying it or selling it at this time.